You've got to just go through.
I think they're old and brittle. They're brittle.
Yeah,
I think they're-
I know, I don't think they're very old.
Oh, really?
30 years old. Maybe not that old. I don't know. What do you think? Yeah, maybe they're 80 or 30.
My eyes are as bad as yours. I told you.
Do you need help, Jessica, or do you have help? Perfect. Okay, Mr. Chairman, we are recording
Okay.
and live streaming when you are ready.
Okay, I'd like to call the Human Resources and Public Works Committee to order. The next item is approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Support, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Nays say us. Okay, it's been approved. Okay, our call to the public. Do we have any folks online?
We do not at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thanks. That being the case, we will now consider approving the editorial changes to the 2022 Isabella County Master Plan as adopted per resolution PC 23-01 by the Isabella County Planning Commission on January 12th, 2023, in accordance with the Michigan Planning and Enabling Act. We have the report here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Kim.
All right, so what we have here is, if you recall, back in December, early meeting, I came in front of you to share with you the master plan that was adopted by resolution of the Planning Commission. During that meeting, we were requesting your final approval. Back in, I think it was 2006, the county board established a resolution that said they wanted that final approval authority over that document. During that, I shared with you the new language that went into the document, and in the section on page 44, I think I gave you that page just as well. I can put it down here real quick.
There's just one printed copy for the table, right, Jess,
This is
of the actual plan.
it's this page here that deals with sanitary sewer and water supply systems. In that meeting, we had inadvertently left out the Saginaw Chippewa. This is not actually it's part of it, but we left out the Saginaw Chippewa Indian tribe as part of that. Commissioner Jalzinski had asked the question. We just inadvertently missed it. The board that
Very last
evening
page of the staff report.
you guys made a motion to approve pending legal review. I went to Tim Perrone with Cole Stoker and Toski, talked to Tim about it. Tim felt that it was an editorial change and it did not require the Planning Commission to take 10 steps backwards to get that information put into the document. So he recommended that we go ahead and just move that information into the document. In the process of that, we inadvertently missed Union Township, probably the biggest water system. Don't know how that happened, but we did get both of those added back to the document. And then at our January meeting this year, the Planning Commission did adopt another resolution, which I included in my packet which is resolution PC 2301 with these editorial changes, just to add Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribe and Union Township into the list of localities that do have sanitary water and sewer supply systems. So we're just basically bringing this back to the board as recommended by the attorney for your final approval of those editorial changes.
Okay.
Really longer winded than it needs to be. It's a pretty simple task.
Fine, you went through the whole thing so well the last time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, with that being said, I'll consider approving the editorial changes to the 2022 Isabel County Master Plan as adopted per resolution PC 23-01 by the Isabel County Planning Commission on January 12th, 2023, in accordance with the Michigan Planning Enabling Act.
Support. It's been moved and supported to move item 4 to the work and regular session of the county commission next week. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. The ayes carry. The item will be forwarded to next week's meetings. Okay.
Some reading material.
Thanks.
Yes, you're welcome.
Our next item is, which is a hot topic, post-construction sound study discussion.
Yeah, so, at your last meeting, you guys talked about this. We've talked about it several times over the years while we've tried to, work to get this, post-construction sound monitoring, study completed. It did get, finalized here a couple of weeks ago. And we've had the ability to digest that final, document. I just kind of want to back you up and remind you why, we did this, what the purpose of it was. And then we'll talk a little bit about methodology and then its final conclusion. So the county zoning ordinance requires, in Article 12, Section 1205, QQ 28, requires a post-construction sound study to be completed for a wind turbine project. That study is to be completed by Isabella County using a third-party professional, selected by the Planning Commission and paid for by the applicant. So this costs the tax dollars no money to do, but we wanted them essentially, when we wrote the language, we wanted the applicant to prove to us that their model that they provide us at site plan time when we make approvals complies with the ordinance. Their model complied with the ordinance, but does a sample selection of sites around the project actually comply with the model? And the compliance number falls within that same section. 1205 QQ 16 requires a 50 decibel maximum, it's a 50 decibel L50 output. And so the models came in under that 50 decibels in areas where the model was really, really tight and close to a non-participating property line, like compliance is, on a paper, really, really tight. We wanted to try to study some of those areas. So after selecting our consultant at the Planning Commission level, we did bring that to the board, and the board signed off on that contract. I think Commissioner Horton signed off on that contract last year. We brought that company in and we selected the worst case modeled areas around the project. So we found that there was 52 areas that were of concern. Now we want to select down to 14 of those areas. We used 14 because 10% was the model number that we wanted to study within the project. And we have 136 turbines. Our 10% came at 13.6. We raised that up to 14 so that we had a 14th site. One of the things I want to make sure is understood in this document is that we talk about turbines, 136 of them. We talk about doing 14 site studies. Some of those site studies have 14 turbines impacting the sound. So we didn't study an individual turbine necessarily. We studied a site to ensure that it was in compliance with the noise being generated by these new turbines in the area. So we had, in one of the sites, there was only a single turbine that was impacting the sound. In another one of the sites, there were 14 turbines impacting the sound. And I'll show you that in a table a little while down the road here. So the company, what we had asked them to do was we asked them to come in and do some attended monitoring, meaning they're going to come in and they're going to set up equipment. They're going to sit there and they're going to record equipment and they're going to record anomalies, cars passing by, cow mooing in the pasture, those types of things, animal noises, people noises, them talking with a landowner who comes out. We did that on, I believe, 5 occasions. And in those 5 attempts, this company would fly in from either Colorado or they would fly in from New Hampshire to record the data. They'd come in, they'd set up for a day, they would leave, stay the night typically and go back the next day. We had to make sure we had proper wind. There's only certain times that you can get a turbine at max power with no rain, no thunder. Had to be high enough wind speed at the top of the turbine. I think it was 18 miles an hour, or they use meters per second, but I'm not a meters per second guy. 18 miles an hour or greater at the turbine hub height, but it had to be 12 miles an hour or less down here at the recording equipment. Otherwise, you'd get interference from the wind blowing on the mics. So in all those initial five attempts, we only ended up with one valid site of data, one piece of data for all of them. Cost a boatload of money to go through the process. So we sat back with our attorney and we talked about the standards in which we had set initially for the project. And we all came to an agreement that we could do some unattended monitoring. And what unattended monitoring did for us was they would come in, they would drive a spike in the ground. Basically, they would lock their equipment to it. It's on a battery pack, and it would collect data for 10 days before that battery would die. The key to unattended monitoring was that we had to still watch the weather forecast every single day while those 10 days were going on, select a good period of 10 days that we felt was good. And we all know that weather, we can't predict 4 hours, let alone,
Right.
10 days. We had to do shutdowns. There was 138 scheduled shutdown. And what a shutdown was, remember, we're testing the sound of turbines only, not the ambient noise, but just the turbine noise that's generated. So we have to have the turbine at maximum capacity, running at pretty much close to full speed as we can for a period of time. And then we have to have DTE radio in and shut that thing down for us. And when they would shut it down, we would lose the turbine so we could collect ambient. And then their calculations of taking, turbine plus ambient and ambient, they're able to do that crazy sound engineering magic and come out with just a number for turbines. So we were able to collect more data in the unattended variety over, I think, three different periods from June 29th through July 11th. Then we had a July 20th to 21st. They stayed over, replaced batteries, and just stayed 2 days and then got out because they had another project to do. And then they came back in November because we still didn't have all the data that we needed. And we're here from the monitoring equipment was here from November 2nd through the 11th. After all the data was collected, they felt they had good enough information after the download of that last visit. They began to run all the numbers and began to calculate and see what each turbine was reporting at those sites, what that sound level was reported out at. And in the executive summary of the document on page 1, it basically states in the very last sentence, the results of the sound monitoring indicate that project sound levels at each of the below at each site were below 50 dBA L50, which tells us in an executive summary they're in compliance with our ordinance. There was some other stuff that we wanted to go through, and I'm going to go through this in some detail with you, but not site specific or not methodology type specific detail. But on page 4, there's a map in here, and it shows all the turbine project itself. It shows the sites of the turbines, and it shows the sites and where we located our monitors. Again, when I indicated earlier, we had 52 sites of worst case or worst modeled numbers. We wanted to ensure that we weren't clustering those all in one area, that they were spread out amongst the park, that there was some in every one of the townships. Yeah, so we kind of dispersed it to those worst case scenarios within the entire project. So it's just a general map within the document. I'm going to turn a few pages further and I'll get you there in a second. I apologize. So the very last it's like page 14. No, page 13. I'm sorry. So here's the results in tabular form. And again, I will just read right before table 1, the very last sentence there. As shown in the last column of table 3, the highest measured L50 was 49 dBA at site 5. The next highest measured L50 was 48 dBA measured at sites 6 and 12. So just showing us our worst case of all of those, still under our 50 dBA. And I know when some people look at numbers, 49 to 50, boy, that's awfully close. But between every one of these numbers, it's an exponential. And again, this is a sound engineering thing. I don't know the details and the actual analytics to it, but it is very exponential. So it's not just 1 dB easily occurs. It's quite an exponential curve to get to that, quite an exponential amount of power and wind needed to get to that next dB necessary. So the first table here basically is just our monitoring periods. You can see in the first column, the dates are there of when we studied it. The times are there when we studied it. The next column is the attended versus unattended. And as you can see in the attended, there were sites that were monitored, which were all 14 sites on different days and times. And then the very last column was the sites with valid data. Only site 1 in those first 5 attended days were we able to get good data.
Wow.
When we went to the unattended data, which is the last 3 rows of those columns, and we set up for longer periods, we were able to get 2, 4, 6 in our first unattended. We were able to get 6 sites with more than 1 valid data point for us to be able to calculate this. So you can kind of see how that worked out. The other thing is it's just wind. It's Mother Nature. We were at their pleasure those days, and whatever we got, we got. And so it worked out. Took us a little longer than we expected, but it did work out.
Mhm.
The very next table, table 2, shows all 14 sites. Shows the parcel ID that those sites were, that those monitors were set up on. Shows the lat longs for those in decimal degrees. And it shows the affected wind turbines. This is where I talked earlier. Site 5, if you follow it across, site 5 was 49 dB. It was our highest, our worst case scenario. The turbines that affected it in that last column there was 14 different turbines affecting the noise level at that one site. So of those 14 turbines, that affected it, they really only had an effect up to 49, which still held that site in compliance with our ordinance. So we didn't test 14 turbines of our 136. We tested 14 sites, which included, as you can see, a ton of turbines in that last column there. The very last table, which is a summary of the sound monitoring results. This again is the sites 1 through 14 listed. The number of shutdowns, both attended and unattended. And remember, the shutdown is to collect that ambient. Periods with valid data, greater than 30 minutes of valid data, both attended and unattended. And there's a column in there for average turbine, only L50. I'll talk about that in a second, but it's the last column that calculates that number at each one of those sites. So site 1 had a 46 dBA L50, and we had to keep under 50 dBA L50, and you can see all 14 sites complied with that. The average column, I don't necessarily like it being in the document myself, because I think it scares people that, oh, we average things together and we got this number through an averaging system. We didn't. What was averaged was not the actual data itself, it was the final result. So if you look in the attended, let's look at site 6, unattended, greater than 30 minutes of valid data. We had 33 greater than 30-minute sets of data there. So what that meant was the next column, the averaged L50, we averaged all 33 of those out. But the worst case of those 33 was our 48 in that case. So the average wasn't of the individual hourly minute data that we collected of sound. It was of each one of those monitoring periods, so that we could say, one, all we're looking for is the worst case, but let's see how all 33 of those really chalked up. One of them was our worst case, and the rest of them, where did they fall? And if you look at most of these, in that case, it was 47. So most of those were right at 48. or 47 or 46 to get an average of 47. So the last column is what we're looking at. Again, shows complete compliance, as did the executive summary and the conclusion of results.
Good thing there was unattended, right? For valid.
Yeah. So originally we wanted attended because we wanted to be able to pull all those anomalies out and make sure we got every one of those anomalies. And what happened to us was we could have burned probably $500,000 of money by just going with attended. So in our document that we put together, we said we could use unattended data for supplementary information. And so in talking with our attorney, he said, well, of course, if you go out there and you collect on 5 occasions, you can't get data, you've got to pull some supplementary data in because you got to complete a study and you got to do it. Now, the study was required to be done within 12 months. And obviously we just ended last month. We were at about 18 months.
Wow.
Again, it was simply because we couldn't get data. We couldn't get data when the weatherman was telling us data was valid.
Parameters
Yeah.
were so specific.
Yeah, it was too site specific with the meteorological data and everything else to be able to get it. So we got it. It shows compliance with the ordinance. So I want to walk into a couple of tables of the data sets in the back. So Appendix B, which is B1, it's only a few pages, maybe 5 or 6 pages beyond where we just were. It's Appendix B and it's page B1. So this appendix basically is the monitoring site descriptions and their results. So of the worst case scenario of data that was collected at all 14 sites, we have an appendix for each one of them. So site 1, what we're looking at, I'm only going to go through one of these, and if you have questions on the others, I can answer them at a later point once you get to digest this a little further. But at site 1, the monitoring equipment was set up about 1,050 feet from the nearest turbine. In this case, in site 1, we only had 1 turbine affecting it. We tell you what days we were out and monitored. This is the one that we got attended monitoring data on. It was attended and monitored on April 21st between 6:20 and 9:30 p.m. It was the worst case. In this case, it was the only one, so it had to be the worst case. The last sentence before we get into the table of graphs below, the turbine only sound level for this period was 46 dBA L50 below the project threshold. So at every site we go, we're kind of mining through this from an executive summary telling us we're good, to a conclusion telling us we're good with tables data, now to really site specific at each one of these sites data telling you we're really good. So the graph, while it's super confusing looking, really isn't if you look at it for about 3 weeks. But it is confusing looking. So on the right-hand side of the graph at the top, there's the word exclusions. These are the different types of exclusions: anomalies, precipitation, and wind gusts. Okay, those are tracked along the top of the graph. You see some red dots up there on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, you see a couple of, they look gray or bluish to me. They're anomalies. Car passing by, something like that. So we have exclusion periods in here. Then on the left-hand side, we have a legend that basically gives us the overall period sound levels. We have an L50, 1 minute, which basically means we collected over an hour period of time, 60 data points. We have an L50, 1 minute of excluded time. So we took those data sets, those points out of that data set. We have background L50, hourly, and a wind turbine background hourly, and a turbine only hourly. And so again, if you look at it on the left-hand column, the 50 dB side, there's a line going across. That was our threshold of the 50 dB, not the printer line. It appears there's a weird dotted dash line on mine. I don't know if you have it on yours, but it's the actual 50 dB line. So the dash line that's kind of going up and down like this, that's our minute collected data, but it was excluded because of the wind gusts up above. You can see the red dots. The black thick line that's kind of interspersed through this thing, those are the times of period when it wasn't data that was excluded. It was real L50 data being collected, but it wasn't excluded. But if you look at our excluded time, excluded and valid time, they're all under that 50 dB, with the exception of it looks like there may be 1 point at 50 or above 50, which was excluded because of the wind gust. The straight green line across there, there's actually 2 lines there. It's a green one and a bluish one. right in the same place. Those are the 1 hour. Why are they straight? Because we only collected 2 data points. It's 1 hour. So we collected a point here and a point here, and you draw a line across it. We weren't really looking for 1 hour, but we wanted to set a base for 1 hour. So the minute data, the stuff that's bouncing around, is the actual data that was calculated to the L50 standard. So while it's complex, there's one of these for each one of the sites, showing the worst case scenario. We talked earlier about whichever site had 33 valid points. You'll only see in here the graph for the worst case scenario one. Every single one of these sites, when you get to it, reads the exact same, that it's below the project threshold of 50 dB. So it's within our standard. I know that's a ton, but I'm going to jump us really quick a bunch of pages back to, it's the beginning of this tabular data like this. It's page C1. Yeah, it doesn't feel as very good getting us there without real page numbers. So, yep. So this data set, Appendix C1, is tabular data for every site for every valid period. So that's why the document is still this big the rest of the way back, is because that site that had 33, there's 33 pages like that. The worst case scenario was graphed a little better up front to show its compliance. But I'm going to walk through one of these as well. We'll walk through site 1 since we've looked at it. This shows measurement times up at the top. It shows power output. Again, we wanted to make sure that these turbines were at or close to their maximum power output. That green area there, that's that valid 30-minute period or 30-minute or beyond period. The next table of data below it is the wind speed in meters per second. As you can see, we're up around 13 meters per second. I gave you 18 miles per hour early. I think 13 meters is somewhere around 21 or 22 miles per hour. So we're well above it. So you can see, and as you look down that further in the time collected, the wind got less. That's why we didn't end up with valid data. That's why the turbines aren't spinning at maximum, speed, and we couldn't use that data. The results, the last table at the very bottom of the page, kind of walks you through what the ground wind speed was, what the maximum wind gust was, what the valid times periods were. And again, that very last column is our L50 only that was recorded at the time. And as you can see, none of those data points there during the valid periods were above the L50 requirement. And then on the right-hand little box we have on the bottom corner, it talks about the hour before shutdown period and the hour after shutdown period. It gives us the turbine only sound level was at 46 dBA for 35 minutes. I apologize, it's so small. It's so small it was when I printed. I'm looking at it on a screen monitor that's much bigger. But again, it's showing us for each one of those sites. And as I said, you go to site 2, I think there was 2 or 3, you're going to see 2 or 3 pages for site 2, in this. And then the very last thing I'll point out to you, I'm not going to even go to it, but there's one more appendix beyond this, which is Appendix D, and it basically gives us the meteorological data, the precipitation and humidity and temperatures and all of that stuff for those valid periods, or those testing periods, actually, the times we were out there testing, so that we can ensure that we had good meteorological data while we were conducting this report to give us the numbers that show compliance with the ordinance. So I know I dumped a ton out there. I could talk for 3 more hours if you'd like, but feel free to review the document. I wanted to come to you guys today. I wanted to come. I scheduled myself to every committee set. Each one of the committees are hearing this on a little more individualized basis. If you have any questions about the report, if you're getting through it and you're looking and you have some questions, feel free to give me a call and I can do my best to put on my sound engineering hat and get into the data and show you or be able to answer your question for you.
Okay. Wow.
So it's a ton of information. It was a long time coming. We have closed this project out finally. I started working on this project in 2015 with some zoning amendments and some big meetings that you might recall. Yeah. And we just got final closeout on the document last week. So we are boxed up and set aside, and I can say that was a long time coming. It was.
Yeah, because Terry mentioned to me, he's been getting a lot of calls.
Have you?
about
Well,
this very
any one of us that are in townships, you know, 1, 2, you know, maybe Jerry's down there, Frank and Chris. When we go to township meetings, this is the first question they
Okay.
ask. Is, yeah, and the haters are gonna hate. I mean, you can't convince them
Yeah.
otherwise. My wife walks 2 miles every morning and she's one of
There's a couple things to remember, and this is something that we talked about a lot through the process early on is, there are some people that are sensitive to this stuff too, sensitive to different octaves of noise. And just because we're in compliance doesn't mean that it's not irritating to some people. Right. But our level of standard of compliance for this is just like it is for any other zoning requirement. If you have one junk vehicle in your yard and your neighbor don't like it, the ordinance allows you to have one junk vehicle in your yard. And so the neighbor next door might complain to us or make accusations with regard, but they're allowed to have it. Gets to 2, they're in violation of the ordinance, and we will, go in and rectify that or attempt to rectify that in some manner. Same is here. Just because we're done doesn't mean that there are events where, a blade gets a crack in it and it puts out a whistle, that the whistle becomes higher than. DTE is pretty aware of those. We've had several of those happen already through the project. And they notify us usually, hey, if you're getting any complaints in this area over here, just want to let you know turbines such and such and such and such are going through a wind or going through blade changes because of whistling. And they'll dial those things back, they'll shut them down, they'll change a blade, and they'll move back on. So complaints are still valid in some situations. This is what the point I want to make is that it doesn't mean because we have a study and we're done and we've set it aside that we're done with this project. We realize it. DTE has a number for complaints. They can be contacted directly, or you can contact us. When we're contacted, we essentially call DTE and say, what's going on over here? This is what we received. They've tried to rectify it. They have talked to, I know several people who've made complaints, and DTE's worked with them and made modifications and made changes, or talked with them to educate them to some degree on what's happening and what they might be hearing.
So it's a complex situation.
It is, and it doesn't go away. Like I said, just because we box it up, it doesn't go away. The requirements of compliance are gone. Now we're in what we call enforcement mode, like we are with any project, any special use permit, any site plan approval, any zoning approval in general. It just kind of goes into that enforcement mode next.
Okay. I have more of a flickering problem than I do a sound problem.
Yeah.
Every once in a while.
Well-
I mean, it's a certain pitch and a certain.
The shadow flicker or
Yep.
just the noise, the shadow flicker itself? Okay. What, okay, I'll get with you on it. I'll double check because we have with shadow flicker, we've got very few complaints on shadow flicker because DTE was being more proactive than what our ordinance required. They're moving to a new shadow flicker mechanism, which is a sundial. Not required by ordinance. They meet our standard currently. But they've found that eliminating shadow flicker altogether is better for the community. And they've talked to us about putting these sundials on. Basically what a sundial does, if the sun is shining on it and it falls within the period of time, because we know with the location of a building and a turbine in a given location and knowing the inclination of the sun, we know exactly every single minute of every single day where that shadow is going to be cast. If there's sun on it during the period where shadow flicker would be received by a home, the sundial basically automatically shuts the turbine off.
Wow.
So it's an automated
Really?
system that they're looking to go to that'll automatically shut it down. Now, if it's cloudy, you're not going to get a shadow. It's still going to run. It's not
It's
gonna
gotta be
get shut
a
down.
bright, sunny,
Yeah,
and it is late afternoon, early evening type
Okay.
hour.
yeah. And we have a calendar of every single receptor, meaning every single house that was impacted. We have a calendar that I could tell you specifically how many minutes or hours in the year that you will receive and on what days you'd receive it. So
Mhm.
talk to me a little more and we'll get you, I don't want to put your location on camera here necessarily, but give me some information later on. We can walk through it and I can share that stuff with you. Now, DTE has told us that's what they're moving to. They're not required to move to it, so we can't force them to do it.
Right.
But I keep telling them
I
anything we
pull the
can,
blinds.
anything we can do to make to be the best possible neighbors in our community they can be. I encourage them to do it, whether we're required to or not. All right.
That's encouraging. Plus have something to say to people when they call.
Yeah.
Or number, like the number and all that, right?
Yep.
Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Very, very valuable. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that. Our next item is consider establishing an ad hoc committee to review material recovery facility feasibility study and determine the next steps forward for Isabella County material. So we have Jake Ford. Hi.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning, James.
As you can see by the staff report, we have gotten results from the feasibility study. That study is a pretty comprehensive study. Obviously the facility has been online since the early 90s. So we are really looking at best steps forward. You can see that there is some other considerations with it. The county can choose to disregard the feasibility study, continue running the MRF as they have. The county can choose to end MRF operations, but my recommendation bringing this feasibility study forward is for the Board of Commissioners to establish an ad hoc committee to study this feasibility study and kind of make determinations as to how we move forward with it. Pretty straightforward with what we have.
A lot of components to it.
Yeah,
It's
there
gonna
is.
take a committee to wrangle it.
There is a tremendous.
totally agree.
Stuff here, so.
Okay, so the next step would be passing this and discussing it at the next meeting,
Next
right?
meeting. Yep.
Could we get a
Alright.
Motion, please.
Consider establishing an ad hoc committee to review the material recovery facility MRF feasibility study and determine the next step forward for the Isabel County Material Recovery Facility.
Support. It's been moved and supported to move item 6 to the work and regular session of the county commission. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. The ayes carry, and this item number 6 will be moved to the regular meetings next week. Thank you, Jake.
Have a good day. Stay warm.
Okay, our next item is consider approving the proposed pay ranges for Isabella County Parks and Recreation seasonal part-time employees for the 2023 season. Hi.
Hi.
Ladies.
I would like to introduce our interim director, Miranda Walker. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Yes, thank you.
Hi, Brenda.
And congratulations.
Yeah.
So this is a proposal that actually Miranda and I have worked on this for a long time, because year to year, we would update that information and that you received. It's not as complex as the sound turbine. So let's go to
Thank
page
you.
35. Oh, he's gone. No, I'm saying that. That was very interesting.
It really
Yeah.
is.
Incredible, yeah. So as you all know, this, the seasonal employees were put on the wage scale after the wage study. So you've got these attachments that it seems like a lot, but it's not. It's, the first one shows when I first came here in 2000 or so, it was hard. We had every employee that came to work seasonally would go with the one pay level and get a quarter each year,
Mhm.
period, or may not get a quarter.
If they came back.
If they came, if they came back. And then we had for every hour that they worked at the end of the season, they received a quarter. What did we call it again?
It was called a schedule adherence allowance, and it was 25 cents for every hour they worked during the summer.
Usually for somebody that worked 40 hours was about $150. Okay. And as you recall, last year, you guys approved a 10%.
Retention.
Thank
pay.
you, guys. I know. So that proved to a person that worked 40 hours a week in the season got $750. And that did prove very successful, that many of our staff did stay on. Very interesting staff that did not, that, oh no, I need this job, but they would leave like 3 weeks prior, and then they've gave that away. But it really helped to get people to work through Labor Day. Okay,
Mhm.
so that was really successful. But as time goes on to this year, minimum wage keeps going up.
Mhm.
And it's still, we're in the same situation. As you guys know, you've seen other department heads come to the meeting. And it's also pretty much sorry, not getting away from you, but that's something right in my eye, is we just really need to stay competitive with our area people like City of Mount Pleasant, CMU, and then local businesses. But park businesses, we do know what like Midland's paying, and also what Newaygo, we do know what Newaygo's paying, but Mecosta County,
Mhm.
that have campgrounds, Midland doesn't, but they kind of are close enough. So anyways, that's something that we started looking at, because we really still had a challenge. We did not, as it says in the report, make our full staff, and it really puts our full-time and our year-round part-time people, because that was also a huge benefit, because they're, I don't say more committed, but it's their full-time year-round part-time job, and it's established kind of a good base for our supervisory staff. I don't want to say it bad, but it's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of, stress during the
Mhm.
season when we don't have enough people, and then projects are on the wayside and so on. Gate attendance too, we would mix it up a little bit. We'd have to exchange our hours, and Miranda handles all that, schedules them. How much time did you spend every week?
Yeah, it was a lot
It's-
this past summer. There was quite a few that left, and then we'd have to adjust schedules and get somebody new in, and
Wow.
Yeah. So it normally is you do the schedule, and a couple times in the past, it's really been very much of your time as well our park headquarters. So that's why we're trying to request maybe something else. Something that was combining everything together. Because what I found at a place I used to work was this range that gate attendants would have a range from the low end to the high range. And then if you look on the last page of your attachment, we had a form that we would appoint, keep going, there it is. So it's a seasonal wage structure form. And that helped us. So somebody that walked in that was semi-retired, had, maintenance experience or whatnot, they would not be making the same amount that an entry-level person with very minimal experience would make. Because it wasn't very motivating when it was one of those things that really worked where I was before at another parks and our more recreation side of things, that we had the ability to give them a little bit more if they had more experience. City of Mount Pleasant also uses this as well. And we have our own, we've made adjustments, both of us, but it's very similar. And over the years. So I'm asking, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and we were using this prior to 2021. So we were doing the ranges from 2006 to 2020. And then 2021 is when we went onto the wage scale.
Right. Yeah.
And
Okay.
some of the heartburn that we had right away using the wage scale was, when we progress along a wage scale, we have a year of service, you go to the next year, a year of service, you go to the next year. How as a seasonal, do you go to the next year when you only worked a season? Right? So it was an equity thing too, right? With the whole wage scale.
Right.
So
Right.
Right.
really what the parks had been doing worked well for the parks, tried the wage scale, did
It's-
not work well for seasonal parks
Yeah.
employees.
And especially not having that flexibility.
Yeah.
I'm glad the sheriff's here, because I was going to talk about them behind his back, but, they're asking to hire people with a lot of experience up a higher level. We did the same thing, we're all trying to do that, and you guys have been very supportive, and that was commented at the last meeting with the truck driver that Jake did, you know, that there's qualified people out there, but they're like, I'm not gonna work at this level here,
Right.
or nicely. I mean, they're not being mean, but because they can go get a job at
Sure.
someplace else. And then that time, it was mentioned by one of the commissioners, and I'm sorry, I don't know which one, but just said, we're just gonna continue to see this be an issue because it hasn't stopped, that the wages are that much more competitive.
Mhm.
So in going over this with Miranda and Kurt and just saying, you know, I think we need to go back to our old way, our old ways in a good way. But so that's what this is proposing. So so that's it in a nutshell.
If we went back to this, would the wage study stuff still be in effect? or
In
not?
essence, and I'll go over that. Like
Okay,
if we
sure.
go, now we'll go back to the report and then go to the first attachment. Because what we did is we just have this for informational. So it gives you, instead of the entire wage scale from 1 to 20, what, I don't know what it goes up to. But this gives you pieces that pertain to us.
Okay,
So at the top, this is a yeah, the green one, thank you, because we're saving money on that color, I know. We are, but so you're well, I know. So this is at the top is the history of parks from 2006 to 2014, and this is where it's really a reality check, you guys. Minimum wage never raised during those years. I mean, if you remember, and look at then the change every year, it went up because that was when they were doing that. Well, I think they skipped maybe 1 year, but so each time these were the wage ranges that I would review with the administrator, because they were, I mean, at the time they were approved for the 1 year, and then we would go up if we had a 2% increase, 1%, that's the only thing that raised. Or I would recommend in, as you see, like when you get to 2019 or 18, they all have like a little explanation under there. It just, because it was just getting closer and closer, minimum wage was getting, we always were like about 7% higher than minimum wage, so we could be competitive.
Mhm.
So this was, each year was given to the administrator, or reviewed with the administrator, and why, and then it would usually, well, it was approved. I mean, we would discuss it, why. So it wasn't anything crazy. It was just trying to stay competitive. And then when the wage study came in play, fiscal year 21, so the third green heading is then when we did the Park 1, Park 2, Park 3. We didn't have those numbers.
It got a little more complicated.
Right. And we did, because that then, so if we were going to go on the wage scale, we had different levels of gate attendants, because that was where an entry level gate attendant would be probably a 1, 2, the job description changed a little bit with a little bit more, well, a little bit more experience and maybe a little bit of training or supervisory experience, because we relied on them for more. And the 3 was definitely more supervisory and training.
Okay.
So there it is. So that's why this grew in fiscal year 21 to 20 or to 22. And now what we are recommending is going back to, we're finding that, yeah, that it will be to our benefit that we can go back to the old way of the range. And the bottom part here, which is in yellow, which how whenever I, you know, like when I would meet with the other administrators, I would highlight that, but try to give basic information just to hit, you know, we didn't expect that people would keep that in their brain of why or what, but we gave the, you know, over the years, what we did, like here, you know, in the headings 1 and 2, this was every single year was, and when I put it, or we put it in red, it was the change. So they would see, I was then recommending that year to change it because minimum wage was going up and we wanted to be competitive. So we were always working with trying to be as competitive as we could locally. But now it's just got, you know, as everyone knows, it's who knew, you know. So the bottom part is what is being recommended. But, and I did, I wanted to note something here. These wages down below of the proposed pay ranges for fiscal year 23 are based on the wage scale where they fall, except for the gate attendant and the park rangers. And that's something I did leave a message, Nicole. I left a message just for a heads up, and it would be nice to keep it up the 1 more level, just because gate attendants with our reservation system and what we're relying on, and they're more, we've always had like someone, like Nicole from our office would go out and do the training and, be out in the field a little bit more. And we're a little light in our office right now with a lot of other things going on that we will rely on. We've got some gate attendants that have been with us a long time and that they would even be in a bigger role. So if we could have, and for same with park rangers, we're very lucky with having some skills that welding, mechanical, whatever, that'll be more competitive. So that line item, I did put up one more level, just the high range, just in case if we get somebody like that.
Mhm.
But I want to be, I failed to include it in here because I don't want you to think I'm trying to slip it in there.
I would get it in there before Tuesday's meeting though, so we
No.
can have an updated.
No,
one
no, I will.
for the board.
Yeah, that's, I just wanted to not spring this on you guys at the last minute, but let you know that
Perfect.
that was something, I know, and somebody to my right remembered why I did it. And then it was like, yeah, I think I remember. Well, so.
Yeah, and just another thing to point out too is if we did keep the county wage scale for fiscal year 2023, if you go to the right column on the third row.
Mhm.
Like for instance, a park ranger. So we say, okay, we have park ranger 1, 2, and 3, and their starting wages would be 1073, 1151, and 1233. So we're saying a park ranger 3, even with experience, training, would start at 1233. And then when we looked at like the city of Mount Pleasant, they're starting somebody, a high school student with no experience at, I think it was 12 or 1250 an hour.
Wow.
So just a good example of kind of where our scale is compared to where like the city is hiring in on their seasonal employees.
It's really important, really
just have
relevant.
Right.
No experience. I mean, it's like a
Wow.
minimum wage is 1010.
Hmm.
Because they need their crew, right? So I will tell you our 10%, which I know, I don't think the city does. I know, unless, I asked about it, but they don't, but they do this other, the worksheet. That's huge. That's very motivating to somebody working in the summer to make it through. And I mean, I had some parents say that their son or daughter, one in particular, they could not go on the family trip because they had to finish. I said, well, they could get a sub. If they get a sub, they still qualify for Labor Day weekend. And and the parent was like, that's no big deal because they worked it out, but she was like, this is a high school person. It's somebody that works in this building, but it was just very cute. She goes, oh no. So here she sees in her child a commitment and dedication. I mean, we don't want people to miss
Yes.
the reunions or anything like that because they do have the opportunity to really
Sure.
think ahead. But we're seeing it's motivating to the staff to stay on. And also when you said about when we get people hired in, we had one person who was in high school, worked with us again as a park ranger. And the following year, he was our park manager. That's like not really, because it was that great of an employee. So we're not locked in that it was motivating. And I will say he did a great job, but it was, and he was at it was a tough season for him. But we were so grateful that he was there because he was a 3-year employee who just had the maturity level to be at that position. I mean, there's stories we could tell. I mean, we could tell you some other stories that people who wanted out, and then they quit on us with a day's notice, if even that. So we won't, but it just happens. But in the long run, we had enough staff to finish the season that made it, great. But this, I think, going back to the system and, always reviewing it with the administrator, you know what I mean? Just the management side of it, it did work. And I just think until we see something different, because we're just going to be coming back. Like when we get that one candidate that we really want to not start at the level, park ranger 2, or even 3, the lower level, because we're still competing with minimum wage, not minimum wage, low wage ranges just for entry level at and Mount Pleasant is, our neighbor. I mean, they're the ones, people don't want to drive out to the park. Well, we may be able to encourage them to do that even at the price of gas when they're going to make a little bit more in the level. So that's what this is. And I will, if I would like to keep it then as this is, but I will mention it in the report side of things, a little bit clearer because
Okay,
Yeah, and I think like these ranges are gonna help attract people to apply to the positions and then also help us retain those positions throughout the entire season and not have them leave for something else at more pay.
Right, very good.
And, speaking of minimum wage, there is a court case about it, to be raised quite a bit. And, appeals court just ruled against it, but another court ruled for it. And, it's gonna go to the Supreme Court, so that'll all be
Yeah.
something that we'll have to pay attention to, right?
We both saw the report.
Yeah.
I worked on that campaign. It was like to get the wage higher and sick time and also to pay restaurant people not to something an hour or something like that. Okay,
There's two sides to it, but it's like, how are people affording to live?
right.
And gas, food, everything.
Well,
But
and
at the
also
same
it was
time-
passed by the people and then the legislature just gutted it. That was really upsetting.
Okay, consider approving the proposal pay range for Isabel County Parks and Recreation seasonal part-time employees for 2023 season.
Support. It's been moved and supported to move item 7 to the work and regular meetings of the county commission next week. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, the same. The ayes carry. Item 7 will be forwarded to next week's meeting. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you. Stuart.
And we've got one more, we're still here.
Oh, okay.
I could tell you. The feeling-
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Just by the tone,
in
right?
just kind way. It was great. seeing you. No, we're still here.
Okay. Number 8 is consider approving temporary right of easement between William D. Whitehead and Nancy J. Whitehead in Isabella County effective February 7th, 2023 until the July 31st, 2023, and authorize the board chair to sign the same. What do we got?
And this is just updating the easement that we've had into place now twice each year. We're getting close to hopefully coming to an agreement, but we need to extend the contract, which actually was up 2 days ago, but it's an easement that we're doing in good faith for them till July, and hopefully that will be with the DNR grant that we have, that will be remedied, and we won't need the easement anymore.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Nope, yeah, we went through this before, so. Consider approving the temporary right-of-way easement between William D. Whitehead and Nancy J. Whitehead and the Isabel County effective February 7th, 2023 until July 31st, 2023, and authorize board chair to sign the same.
Support's been moved and supported to move item 8 to the regular and work session of the county commission next week. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. The ayes have it. The item will be forwarded to next week's meetings.
okay, and I
Thank,
should have a signed copy by them for Jess,
Excellent.
okay,
It's already there, but we're just waiting for it.
cool.
Okay,
Thank you for this time.
you're welcome.
Okay. Do we have any comments or announcements?
No.
Call to the public, any public?
There's no one at this time, Mr. Chairman.
That being the case, I will adjourn the meeting. It's been a very interesting.